video, I am going to deal with one of the famous story in English literature, the selfish giant. You all might have heard this story when you were kids, or it might have been prescribed to you in your school days. So we are going to deal with this particular story in this video. This famous story was written by a famous English writer. His name is Oscar Wilde. So let's look into his life one by one. Oscar Wilde was born on 16th October 1854 in Ireland. He's a famous Irish writer, and his occupations are an Irish poet and also a playwright. He has written many notable plays. It's nothing than dramas. Some of his notable works in English literature are The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, are some of his most notable works. In the year 1899, he got recognized, or he achieved the fame of being one of the most popular playwrights in London. And this particular famous writer happens to pass away or died on 13th November 1900. So now let's look into the story. In the very beginning of the story, we are introduced some of the happy days, the wonderful days had by the children in the garden of the selfish giant. It was completely filled with spring season. Kids often used to go and play in the garden of selfish giant. Selfish giant was not there by that time. He has gone somewhere else. So taking this as an advantage, all the kids who are in the nearby places, who are in that surrounding, they used to come and play in the beautiful garden of selfish giant. It was completely filled with spring season, and birds used to sing sweetly in the garden throughout the day, and many flowers used to bloom. While playing inside the garden, the children, they used to exclaim with each other saying, "How happy we are here. We are having a very good time, a nice time here. How happy we are here." So that was the expressions, that was the mindset of all the kids while playing in that particular garden. So now what happens is, on one particular day, the giant arrives, the owner of the garden. He arrives. Actually, he has gone out for about 7 years to visit some of his friends. After 7 long years, he returned back to his garden. So on seeing some random children playing in his garden, the giant was not happy about it. How can some random kids come and play in the garden which belongs to me? He's very angry. He just chases away all the kids out of the garden, and then he builds a high wall around the garden, and then he puts a notice saying, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." It means some strangers, if they happen to step into my garden, they will be punished severely. So that's the meaning of it. So the children are not at all happy. They don't have any other places to play. So now what they did is, the only place left for them is the dirty roads. It was completely filled with dust. So the children, they were unhappy about the place in which they are supposed to play now. So they often used to say, "We were happy in the past because past we were played in the garden, but unfortunately we are destined to play in the road, on the road." So that was the exclamation of the kids. Now let's see what happens next. Since there was no kid in the garden was very much disappointed. Spring stops or fails to visit the garden anymore. It hates flowers. It comes out of the bloom. When the flowers are about to bloom, it will look here and there, it seems. Seeing that no kids are there, kids are not there anymore to play along with them, the flowers will drop down their head, it seems. So the only season which now completely fills the garden of selfish giant is none other than the snow and the frost. Spring season doesn't visit the garden anymore. And seeing all these things, the giant was filled with sorrow. In all the other parts of the country, in all their gardens, the flowers are blooming, the gentle breeze is blowing. Spring season has been visiting them. But in the garden of the selfish giant alone, no more flowers blooming. It was completely filled with snow and frost. And the giant doesn't know what is the reason behind it. And on one particular day, what happened? Some of the kids, they were very curious. They missed their garden so much and they want to step into it. So bringing all the courage and confidence, they crept to the hole and they got into the garden. And they hid themselves behind the branches of the trees. They don't want the giant to look at them. So they hid themselves inside the branches of the trees. So on that particular part where the kids crept in, that particular area alone is filled with spring season. So seeing this, the giant couldn't understand. What happens here? Some part of my garden alone is filled with spring, while the other parts are filled with snow and frost. What is the reason behind it? So on seeing the kids hid inside the tree, the giant now understands. Okay, so far I had chased the kid away from my garden, so that's why I think the spring had stopped visiting my garden. If I permit them inside, definitely I can get the spring back. Definitely I should be lovable to all. So that's the lesson the giant begins to learn on that particular day. All the kids, he permitted all the kids to play inside the garden. The kids are so very happy. One particular little boy alone was crying throughout because he's too little and he doesn't know how to climb the tree. His eyes are completely filled with tears. Taking pity on the poor boy, the giant lifts the little boy and places him on the branch. At once, when the kid touches the branch, the entire frost and snow begins to melt and the flowers begins to bloom. Spring returns in the garden of Selfish Giant. The giant was so very happy and he too played along with the kids at some times. The next few days passes by. Giant longs to meet the little boy whom he happens to meet earlier. He asks the other kids whether they know something about this little boy and everyone says no, they don't know about him. They don't know the whereabouts of the boy. Giant has a deep yearning within his heart to meet the boy again. And a few days later, few years later, now the giant has become too old. Luckily, giant happens to meet the same little boy again. He just eagerly goes to talk with him or to play with him. The giant eagerly goes near to the boy. Only after going near him, the giant happens to see the wounds on the hands and feet of the little boy. Seeing it, the giant was very angry and he just asks, "Who wounded you? Just tell me the person who hurted you. Definitely I will slay them. I will treat a lesson. I will teach them a lesson." For that the little boy says, "But these are the wounds of love. These are the wounds of love." These words made the giant to realize the meaning behind it. He knelt before the little boy and now the boy says, "Once you were very stone-hearted. You didn't even allow any kids to play in your garden. But later you allowed them. You gave them a place in your heart, not only in your heart but also in your garden also. So now you shall come to play in my garden in your afterlife. You shall come to play in my garden in your afterlife." Saying this, the boy leaves. The next day, the kids eagerly come to the garden to play. So by then, they happens to see the corpse, the dead body of the giant, filled with flowers. So with this, the story comes to an end. In a superficial level, this may look like an ordinary, childish bedtime story. But if you look into the symbolic meaning of it, you will understand many representations. Let's look into the meaning one by one. First, the garden of selfish giants actually represents the earth in which we are living in. The spring season in the garden represents the happy moments in the life of every human. Frost and snow represents the hard times, the tough time we face in our life. Little kids represents the fellow human beings who live along with us in this earth. It shows how compassionate we should be in dealing with them. Little boy is none other than the great Jesus Christ. And the wounds in his hands and the feet are none other than the nail marks left, which comes because of crucifixion. The selfish giant is none other than the good and the bad character which lies within every human. So in this world, we are all selfish giants. We all have good and bad characters within us. So realizing the goodness, we should subdue the vices within us and spread love and happiness just like how the giant did. We should spread love and happiness among all the fellow members. If we did that, if we treat others with respect, and if we value them in all aspects, definitely we will get a place in paradise, in our afterlife. So that is the symbolic meaning which is conveyed in the short story. I hope you're all able to understand the symbolic representation and the explanations given by me. So in order to get a place in the heart of God, or in order to get a place in His paradise, we all should be compassionate, lovable, kind to the fellow human beings who are living with us. So that's the central moral idea of the story. I hope you're all able to understand both the superficial and the symbolic meaning in it. Thanks for listening.